Hello and welcome. Today, we are digging into the history of Oregon. Now, you probably know it for its incredible landscapes and, its progressive reputation. But the real story? Well, it's built on a foundation of some really deep and fascinating contradictions.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the land itself, literally forged by fire and ice. Then we'll get into how different worlds collided over trade and territory. After that, we follow the trail to statehood, which has a really difficult truth at its core. Then we'll explore the radical Oregon system that completely changed its politics. And finally, we'll see how this whole legacy of contradiction is still playing out today.
To really understand Oregon, you absolutely have to start with the land. I mean, long before any people got there, this place was being shaped by these just unbelievable forces. Volcanoes, massive floods, earthquakes. We're talking on a scale that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. And this timeline gives you a sense of that scale. For millions of years, volcanoes were just building mountains. Then, during the last ice age, these colossal floods just ripped through the eastern part of the state over and over again. And these were not your average floods, okay? They were hundreds of feet deep, and they're the reason the soil is so incredibly rich, the very soil that would later pull farmers clear across the continent. And then, about 7,700 years ago, a whole mountain just vaporized.
Now this is what's so cool. This slide shows two totally different ways of seeing that exact same event. Geologists call it the eruption of Mount Mazama, the thing that created Crater Lake. But for the Klamath people who actually saw it happen, it was no simple geological event. It was the epic final battle between the god of the underworld and the god of the sky, a story they've passed down for thousands of years.
So, with that dramatic landscape as our backdrop, let's bring in the people. This is where the human story begins, a story of ancient cultures and the, let's just say, disruptive arrival of newcomers from oceans away.
For more than 13,000 years, this land was home to a whole web of thriving native societies. When European ships finally showed up, first the Spanish, then British and American traders, they weren't really after land. They wanted fur. But that fur trade opened the door. And then, Lewis and Clark's expedition in 1805 basically kicked that door wide open, putting the entire region squarely on the map for the United States.
And all this new attention immediately created a massive geopolitical headache. See, both the United States and Great Britain said they owned the place. The US called it Oregon Country, the British called it the Columbia District. So for decades, they just kind of agreed to disagree, jointly occupying it, which really meant they were competing like crazy for control of that super profitable fur trade.
Well, that standoff finally ended in 1846. Instead of going to war over it, which they almost did, the two countries just drew a line on the map, the 49th parallel. Everything south of that line was now officially, and without any question, American territory. And that one single decision, it changed everything.
The Oregon Treaty was like a starting gun firing. Suddenly, thousands of American pioneers started heading west on the Oregon Trail. They were all chasing the stream of free land, a fresh start. But the society they planned on building, it was founded on a really deep and pretty disturbing contradiction. So, most of the settlers flooding into the Willamette Valley were these small-time farmers. They did not want to have to compete with the huge plantation system you saw in the South. So, one of the very first things their new provisional government did was outlaw slavery. On the surface, it looks great, right? Oregon was going to be a free state. But then you read this quote from Peter Burnett, the guy in charge of that government, and it reveals the actual plan. The goal was never racial equality. It was racial exclusion. They didn't just want to outlaw slavery. They wanted to build an all-white society from the ground up. And these numbers, wow, they just lay that contradiction bare. When it came time to vote for a state constitution in 1857, the white men voting were overwhelmingly against allowing slavery. But look closer. By an even bigger margin, they voted to ban free black people from even being allowed to live in the state. So here's the bottom line. On Valentine's Day, 1859, Oregon joins the Union, and it's the only quote-unquote free state to be admitted, with a constitution that literally banned American citizens from moving there based purely on the color of their skin. This legacy of exclusion, it was baked in from day one. Okay, so as we get to the end of the 19th century, the railroads finally connect this pretty remote state to the rest of the country, and something starts to shift. Oregon, a place literally founded on the idea of exclusion, starts building a brand new identity, this time as a radical laboratory for democracy. By the early 1900s, people were starting to notice. The famous journalist Lincoln Steffens came out to Oregon, and he was just blown away by what he found. He saw a state that was fighting back hard against the corruption of big corporations and political bosses by giving power directly to the people. And this whole thing became known as the Oregon system. Activists like William Uren pushed for it, and the state adopted these three incredibly powerful tools of direct democracy. The initiative, so citizens could write their own laws, the referendum, so they could veto laws from the politicians, and the recall, which gave them the power to fire elected officials they didn't like. It was a populist revolution, and it completely changed Oregon's political DNA. So let's bring this whole story home. How do these two dueling histories, this exclusionary pioneer dream and this progressive populist experiment, how do they play out in Oregon today? Well, the short answer is they are still at war with each other. I mean, you look at Oregon today and you see a state just full of these deep divisions. It's loggers versus environmentalists. It's the massive cultural and political divide between the progressive cities and the conservative countryside. But here's the thing. These aren't new fights. They're just modern-day echoes of the state's oldest tensions. See, it all comes back to that core conflict. Is Oregon a place for the rugged individualist who wants freedom from the government, like the pioneers wanted, or is it a progressive society that uses the power of the group to solve problems, like the Oregon system promised? That argument over land, over liberty, over what it means to be a community is still the central drama of Oregon's story. So in the end, Oregon's history leaves us with these really tough questions. Is it pioneer or progressive, inclusive or exclusive? It's a story that just refuses to be simple. It's a legacy of contradiction that's still being written, and honestly, that's what makes it one of the most compelling and complicated states in the Union. Hey, if you enjoyed that deep dive, we've got plenty more. Go check out another chapter of American history in our U.S. State Histories playlist. And make sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries so you don't miss our next explainer. Thanks so much for watching.